It was a quiet Monday morning at Brookside Elementary, a small school nestled in a peaceful American town. The air was still crisp with the promise of a new week. Ms. Hannah Miller, a teacher whose calm demeanor and observant nature were her greatest assets, walked into her classroom. A warm smile graced her face as she greeted her students one by one. "Good morning, Maya. Hello, Jacob. Great to see you, Chloe." As the children settled into their seats, the familiar sounds of a new day began to fill the room. Backpacks unzipped, binders rustled, and excited chatter about weekend adventures bounced off the walls. The classroom was alive with the vibrant energy of youth, a symphony of laughter and whispered secrets. But amidst this cheerful chaos, one note was jarringly silent: 10-year-old Ethan Parker. He sat alone at his desk near the window, a stark contrast to the lively scene around him. His shoulders were slumped, his small frame looking as if it carried a weight far too heavy for him. His eyes, usually bright with curiosity, were tired and dull, fixed on a point somewhere on his desk that no one else could see. He avoided eye contact, shrinking into himself. Whenever a classmate's laughter came too close, Ms. Miller noticed the change immediately. It was a stark departure from the Ethan she knew. The usual Ethan was a whirlwind of energy, his hand always the first to shoot up with an answer, his voice a constant, enthusiastic hum in class discussions. He was the boy who told jokes that made the whole class groan and laugh, the one who'd excitedly recount every detail of the latest superhero movie. But today, that cheerful, talkative boy was gone. In his place was a quiet, withdrawn shadow. A knot of concern tightened in Ms. Miller's chest. This wasn't just a case of the Monday blues. This was something different, something that didn't feel right at all. She made a mental note to check in with him, to find a moment to ask if everything was okay. She moved to the front of the class, her lesson plan for the day momentarily forgotten. Her focus was now on the small, silent boy by the window. The first lesson was math, a subject Ethan usually enjoyed. Ms. Miller posed a problem on the board, a fun one involving candy and sharing, designed to get their minds working. Hands shot up across the room, but Ethan's remained firmly on his lap. He stared blankly at the board, his expression unreadable. Ms. Miller gently called on him, hoping to draw him out. "Ethan, what do you think? How would you solve this?" He looked up, his eyes wide with a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Was it fear? He just shook his head slowly and mumbled, "I don't know," before dropping his gaze back to his desk. The other students exchanged confused glances. Ethan always knew. Later, during recess, the playground erupted with the usual joyful noise of children at play. Tag, swings, basketball, the options were endless. Ms. Miller watched from the doorway as her class scattered across the yard. But Ethan didn't join them. He found a solitary spot on a bench under the old oak tree, far from the action. He just sat there, watching, as if the world of play was a foreign country he could no longer visit. Ms. Miller decided it was time to intervene. She walked over, her footsteps soft on the grass, and sat down beside him. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" she began, her voice gentle. Ethan just shrugged, not looking at her. "Not much of a recess person today," she tried again. He shook his head. "Ethan," she said softly, "I've noticed you seem a little down today. Is everything all right?" For a moment, he didn't respond. He just picked at a loose thread on his jeans. Then, in a voice so quiet she had to lean in to hear, he said, "I'm just tired," but the look in his eyes told a different story. It was a deep, weary sadness that went beyond a simple lack of sleep. It was the look of someone carrying a secret burden. Ms. Miller knew this was more than just a bad day. The puzzle of Ethan's silence was becoming more complex, and she was determined to find the missing pieces. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her heart, that her role as a teacher had just extended far beyond the pages of any textbook. Her most important lesson of the day would be to understand what was happening to the boy who had lost his smile. As Ms. Miller's lesson on the solar system filled the room, the usual buzz of curiosity was missing one key voice. Ethan, typically the first to ask about black holes or alien life, was silent. He sat hunched over his desk, a small, solitary island in a sea of engaged students. His notebook, usually covered in doodles of rocket ships and planets, remained closed. His gaze was fixed on the worn surface of his desk, as if the wood grain held a secret he was desperately trying to decipher. Ms. Miller continued explaining the gravitational pull of Jupiter, but her attention was divided. She noticed Ethan wasn't just quiet, he was absent, his spirit seemingly pulled into a different, darker orbit. When she gently called his name, hoping to draw him back, the effect was jarring. "Ethan, what do you think is the most interesting moon of Saturn?" The question hung in the air. He flinched, his head snapping up for a second before dropping again. When he finally answered, his voice was a mere whisper, trembling and fragile. "I don't know," he mumbled, the words barely audible. Throughout the rest of the lesson, a repetitive, nervous gesture caught her eye. Ethan kept touching his left arm, his hand instinctively going to his sleeve, pulling it down, adjusting it. It wasn't a casual movement. It was protective, secretive, as if he were guarding something hidden beneath the fabric. He'd smoothed the material over and over, his fingers tracing an invisible line on his forearm. Each time, a flicker of pain or fear would cross his face before being quickly masked by a vacant stare. The gesture was a silent alarm bell, ringing louder and louder in Ms. Miller's mind. This wasn't the usual childhood sadness or a simple bad day. His posture was heavy, weighed down by something invisible yet immense. His shoulders were slumped, not in boredom, but in defeat. The vibrant energy that usually radiated from him had been extinguished, replaced by a dense fog of unspoken dread. Ms. Miller felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Her teacher's intuition, honed over years of observing the subtle shifts in children's moods, screamed that this was serious. This was a cry for help, delivered in a language of silence and shadow. She knew she had to tread carefully. Pushing too hard, calling him out in front of his peers, could send him retreating further into his shell. It would be like trying to catch a frightened bird. Any sudden move would make it fly away, so she watched. She maintained the rhythm of the lesson for the sake of the other students, but her focus was a spotlight on Ethan. She noted every downcast glance, every nervous twitch, every time his hand went to his arm. She was gathering clues, piecing together a puzzle she desperately needed to solve. The bell signaling the end of class shattered the academic calm. Chairs scraped against the floor as students packed their bags, their chatter filling the room with the promise of lunch and recess. But Ethan didn't move. He remained seated, a statue of sorrow amidst the joyful chaos. Ms. Miller stood by her desk, pretending to organize papers, giving him space, but keeping him in her line of sight. She waited for the classroom to empty, for the noise to subside, hoping for a quiet moment where she could reach out. One by one, his classmates filed out, chattering about video games and playground plans. Finally, only Ethan was left. He slowly, mechanically, began to put his untouched notebook into his backpack. He moved like an old man, each motion deliberate and exhausted. This was her chance. She walked over to his desk, her footsteps soft on the linoleum floor. She didn't stand over him, but instead knelt down, bringing herself to his eye level. "Hey, Ethan," she said, her voice soft and warm. "Is everything okay?" He didn't look at her. He just shook his head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. "You seemed a little quiet today," she continued, keeping her tone light and non-accusatory. "I just wanted to make sure you're all right." He shrugged, his shoulders barely moving. He zipped up his backpack and stood to leave, still avoiding her gaze. As he turned, his sleeve hitched up for just a moment, a fraction of a second, but in that instant, Ms. Miller saw it. A dark, angry-looking bruise, stark against the pale skin of his forearm. Her breath caught in her throat. The silent signals, the withdrawn behavior, the hand constantly guarding his arm, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a story he was ready to tell, but his body was telling it for him. He quickly pulled his sleeve down, a flash of panic in his eyes as he realized she might have seen it. He mumbled a quick "I'm fine" and hurried towards the door. Ms. Miller didn't stop him. She knew confronting him directly right now would be a mistake. He was a cornered animal, and her priority was not to scare him further. But she couldn't let it go. The image of that bruise was burned into her mind. As the door swung shut behind him, she stood up, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. The school day was far from over, and her most important lesson was just beginning, figuring out how to help a child who couldn't ask for it himself. Her next steps had to be precise, careful, and immediate. The silent signal had been received, and she was now his first line of defense. "You know, I once read a book that changed my life. It wasn't some grand epic or groundbreaking scientific text. It was a simple story, but it held a truth so profound it shook me to my core. The book told the tale of a boy named Ethan, a quiet kid who always sat in the back of the classroom, lost in his own world. His teacher, Ms. Miller, was a kind woman, experienced and observant. She noticed things others missed, like the way Ethan flinched when someone raised their voice, or how he always wore long sleeves, even on the hottest days. For weeks, Ms. Miller tried to connect with him. She'd offer him extra help with his math, praise his drawings, and ask about his favorite books. But Ethan remained a closed book himself, polite but distant, his eyes holding a sadness that seemed too heavy for his small shoulders. Ms. Miller felt a growing unease, a nagging whisper in the back of her mind that something was wrong. But without proof, without a single word from Ethan, her hands were tied. She knew pushing too hard could make him withdraw even further. So she waited and she watched, hoping for a sign, a crack in the wall he had built around himself. Then, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, during quiet reading time, the universe sent her that sign. The classroom was filled with the soft rustle of turning pages. Ethan was engrossed in a book about faraway galaxies, his face, for a moment, free from its usual tension. He reached for a pencil, but it slipped from his grasp, rolling under his desk with a soft clatter. As he bent down to retrieve it, his sleeve, which was just a little too long for him, slid up his arm. It was just for a second, a fleeting moment in time, but for Ms. Miller, time seemed to stop. There, on Ethan's small forearm, was a dark, ugly bruise. It wasn't the kind of scrape you get from falling off a bike or a friendly tussle on the playground. This was different. It was round, the color a deep, angry purple, and it was shaped unmistakably like the grip of a hand that had squeezed far too tight. Ethan froze. He must have felt the cool air on his skin, felt his sleeve slip. His head snapped up, and his eyes met Ms. Miller's. He didn't have to see what she saw. He knew. In an instant, the look of fear, of pure, unadulterated panic, washed over his face. His hand moved with lightning speed, yanking the sleeve down, covering the mark as if trying to erase its very existence. He straightened up in his chair, his body rigid, his gaze fixed on his book, but he wasn't reading. His knuckles were white as he clutched the pencil. He didn't say a word. Not one, but his eyes screamed. They were wide with a desperate, silent plea. It was a look that bypassed language, a raw communication from one soul to another. In that one heartbreaking glance, Ms. Miller read a whole story. It was a story of fear, of pain, and of a desperate longing for safety. It was a quiet, terrified message that said everything he couldn't. It said, "I need help." And just as clearly, it said, "But I am so afraid to ask." In that moment, Ms. Miller understood. This wasn't just a bruise. It was a clue. It was the first piece of a puzzle she now knew she had to solve, no matter what. The quiet unease she'd felt for weeks solidified into a cold, hard certainty. Ethan was in trouble, and the silence in the room was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with the weight of a secret that could no longer be ignored. Ms. Miller's heart ached for the little boy in front of her. She wanted to rush over, to wrap him in her arms and tell him everything would be okay. But she knew that wasn't the right move. Fear had a tight grip on him, and a sudden action might only strengthen its hold. She had to be smart. She had to be careful. The system for protecting children is complex, and one misstep could have unintended consequences. She needed a plan. She took a slow, deliberate breath, calming the storm of emotions inside her. She needed to act, but she needed to act with wisdom and precision. Her first priority was to document everything. The date, the time, a detailed description of the bruise, its shape, color, and location. She recalled every detail of Ethan's reaction, the panic in his eyes, the speed with which he covered the mark, his rigid posture afterward. These were not just observations, they were evidence. Her mind raced through the protocol she had been trained for. The first step was clear. She had to report her suspicion to the school principal and the designated child protection officer. This wasn't a choice, it was a legal and moral obligation. These situations require a team approach, involving professionals who are specifically trained to handle them. It's a delicate process, designed to protect the child above all else. She knew that involving others wasn't about spreading gossip or making accusations. It was about activating a network of support for Ethan. As she made her notes, she also started thinking about how to maintain a sense of normalcy and trust with Ethan. He was already terrified. If he felt cornered or exposed, he might shut down completely. She decided that for the rest of the day, she would treat him with the same gentle kindness as always, perhaps even more so. She needed him to know that she was a safe person, that her classroom was a safe space. The trust between them was now more critical than ever. It might be the very bridge he would need to cross to find safety. That afternoon felt like an eternity. Every time she looked at Ethan, she saw not just a third grader, but a small person carrying a burden no one should ever have to bear. His silent plea echoed in her mind. It was a call to action she could not ignore. The story of Ethan and the bruise was no longer just a story in a book. It had become her reality, her mission. She knew the path ahead would be difficult. It would involve difficult conversations, navigating complex systems, and facing uncomfortable truths. But looking at Ethan, who was trying so hard to be invisible, she knew she would walk that path. For him, because some pleas, even the silent ones, are the loudest of all. This story, though fictional, touches on a reality that is all too real for many. If you or someone you know is in a situation where they feel unsafe, please know that there is help available. You are not alone. There are hotlines and organizations with trained people ready to listen and support you. You can find resources in the description below this video. Reaching out is a sign of incredible strength. Thank you for listening. Remember to be kind to one another, and if you see something, trust your instincts. Your attention could make all the difference. The bell rang, signaling the end of the day. As the classroom emptied with the usual chatter and clatter of chairs, Ms. Miller stood by the door, a warm smile on her face as she said goodbye to each student. When Ethan approached, she gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Ethan, could you stay behind for just a moment? I'd like to have a quick chat." The classroom was quiet now, filled only with the soft hum of the fluorescent lights. Ms. Miller didn't sit behind her big desk. Instead, she pulled up a small chair right next to Ethan's, making herself smaller, less intimidating. She didn't jump straight to questions. She just sat with him for a moment, letting the silence be a comfortable blanket rather than an awkward void. "You know," she began, her voice soft as a whisper, "I was watching you today, and you seemed a little quieter than usual, like your bright light was a bit dim. Is everything okay?" She didn't look at his bruise. She looked right into his eyes, showing him that she saw him, not just his injury. Ethan's gaze dropped to his worn sneakers. His small hands, resting on his lap, began to tremble. He picked at a loose thread on his jeans, his shoulders hunched forward as if trying to protect himself. A long pause stretched between them. Finally, he mumbled, so quietly it was almost lost in the room, I fell. The words hung in the air, thin and unconvincing. Even as he said them, his own voice seemed to betray him, wavering with uncertainty. He sniffled, and when he finally looked up, his big brown eyes were glistening with hunched tears. He quickly swiped at them with the back of his hand, a frustrated gesture as if angry at himself for showing emotion. That single, desperate movement sent a chill down Ms. Miller's spine. It wasn't the lie that worried her, it was the fear behind it. The lie was a flimsy shield, and behind it stood a little boy who was terrified. He wasn't just hiding a scraped knee from a simple fall. He was hiding something much bigger, something that had stolen his voice and his sparkle. He was scared to talk, and that fear confirmed Ms. Miller's deepest concerns. She knew right then and there that she couldn't let this go. She had to be his safe place, his advocate, no matter what it took. Ms. Miller looked at Ethan, her expression softening. She asked a question that seemed simple but held immense weight. Ethan, do you feel safe at home? The air in the room grew heavy. Ethan didn't say a word. He couldn't meet her gaze. His eyes fixed on a spot on the floor as if it held all the secrets of the universe. The silence stretched, broken only by the quiet hum of the classroom after school. Then a single tear escaped, tracing a path down his cheek, followed by another. He didn't need to speak. His silence was deafening. It was the answer she had been dreading. A cold realization washed over Ms. Miller. This wasn't just a case of a teenager struggling with emotions or school stress. This was something far more serious. This was about danger. She leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle, trying to create a safe space with her words. Ethan, she began, I want you to know that as your teacher, my job is to help you. It's to protect you. No matter what is happening, you are not alone in this. She wanted him to understand that she wasn't a lie, a lifeline he could hold on to. After another long moment, a sound so quiet it was almost lost in the room emerged. It was a whisper from Ethan. Please, he said, his voice cracking, thick with hunched tears, please don't tell anyone. That one sentence, that desperate plea, revealed everything. It was the key that unlocked the crushing weight he had been carrying on his small shoulders, a burden too heavy for any child to bear. It was a cry for help, wrapped in a shroud of fear. Ms. Miller knew, right then and there, that she had to tread carefully, but she also knew she could not let him walk out of that room and back into the danger he was so afraid of. His life might depend on it. Ms. Miller looked at Ethan, and in that moment, she knew there was no other choice. U.S. law is very clear as a teacher. She's a mandatory reporter. But this was about more than just the law. This was about a child's life, a life that might depend entirely on what she did next. So she acted. Immediately, she got in touch with the school counselor and child protection services. And she did it all without making Ethan feel like he was in trouble or to blame for anything. When the officials arrived, Ms. Miller stayed right there by his side. She wanted him to know he wasn't alone, that she was there for him. And in that safe space she created, with a trusted adult by his side, Ethan finally felt brave enough to speak his truth. He told them everything. His stepfather had been hurting him for months. From that moment on, things moved quickly. The authorities who arrived were incredible. The officer who spoke with Ethan was gentle, patient, and understanding, creating an environment where Ethan felt he could be honest without fear. The medical team that examined him confirmed what Ms. Miller had suspected. There were clear signs of long-term physical abuse that had been tragically overlooked. Child Protective Services launched a full investigation that very same day. There were no delays, no waiting around. The priority was Ethan. Ms. Miller watched from a distance as Ethan was carefully escorted to a safe place. A wave of relief washed over her. He was finally away from the danger. The other teachers and staff stood with her in silent support, their faces reflecting a mix of sorrow for what Ethan had endured and immense gratitude for Ms. Miller's courage. Her instinct and her decisive action had saved a life. It was a somber but powerful reminder that one person, one moment of bravery can change everything. Thank you for listening to this important story. If you believe a child is in danger, please contact your local child protective services or law enforcement. Your call could make all the difference. After the investigation, Ethan was placed with a loving and safe foster family. It was here, in this new environment, that his long journey of healing truly began. He started attending therapy, working through the deep-seated trauma he had endured. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to build trust, learning the difficult lesson that adults could be a source of protection and care, not just fear and harm. Ms. Miller, the teacher who had set this rescue in motion, didn't just disappear from his life. She made it a point to visit him during school hours, always with a new book in hand, knowing how much he loved to read. Those visits were like glimmers of sunshine on a cloudy day. And then something wonderful started to happen. He began to smile again. At first, they were small, fleeting smiles, but over time, they became more frequent, more genuine. The change was remarkable, visible to everyone who saw him. His shoulders, once perpetually hunched, began to relax. The constant look of fear in his eyes was slowly replaced by a spark of curiosity and even joy. For the first time in a very long time, Ethan felt seen. He felt valued. Most importantly, he felt safe. This wasn't just a change of address for him. It was the beginning of a whole new life, a life where he could finally just be a kid. The final report from the authorities painted a stark and heartbreaking picture. It confirmed the severity of the situation Ethan had been living in, a reality of constant fear with absolutely no one to turn to for protection. That is, until Ms. Miller stepped in. The report highlighted how her keen observation, her unwavering courage, and her decisive action to report her concerns were the turning point. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that she had quite literally saved his life. Her intervention was the critical moment that broke the cycle of his suffering. Months passed, and Ethan continued to thrive in his new, supportive environment. One day, Ms. Miller received something small but incredibly powerful. It was a note written in a child's careful handwriting. It said, "Thank you for hearing what I couldn't say, just a few simple words, but they held the weight of everything he had been through and all the hope he now had for the future." Ms. Miller carefully placed that note in her desk drawer. It became more than just a piece of paper. It was a constant, profound reminder. A reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person paying attention, one moment of true awareness and courage to completely change a child's entire world and give them back the future they deserve. This story serves as a powerful reminder for all of us. If you ever suspect a child is in danger or is being harmed, please don't hesitate. Your voice can be their lifeline. In many countries, there are dedicated child protection hotlines and services. A quick search for child protective services in your area will give you the right number to call. Your single act of courage could be the one that saves a life, just like Ms. Miller saved Ethan's. It's our collective responsibility to look out for the most vulnerable among us. Thank you for listening. Please consider sharing this story to spread awareness. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video.